Hello, everybody, and good evening. My name's Don Arleth, and you're watching World Talks here on TVP World. A fragile peace in South Caucasus is being put to the test as U.S. Vice President JD Vance travels to Armenia and Azerbaijan to push a U.S. brokered deal that could renew energy and trade routes. The trip comes just 6 months after a landmark White House agreement ended nearly 40 years of conflict. So what's in store and what can we expect? Joining me now to discuss is Richard Giragosian, founding director at the Regional Studies Center. Hello, Richard, and thanks so much for joining us on World Talks.
Thank you.
All right, now we have this, coming in that Vice President JD Vance, together with the Nicole Pashinyan, they have signed some bilateral agreements. So can you please fill us in on how this trip went down with U.S. Vice President JD Vance today in Armenia?
Well, to begin, this is a very unusual, if not rare, opportunity to complement the Trump administration's foreign policy. We do see the arrival of the U.S. Vice President today with an overnight stay in Armenia, and specifically 5 different accomplishments or deliverables. First and foremost is the implementation of the 6-month-old Trump route for international peace and prosperity. But second is a breakthrough agreement on nuclear energy for Armenia, which is a critical national security imperative in the wake of Armenia's overdependence on Russia. A third breakthrough is an agreement on high tech, specifically the development of semiconductors between the U.S. and Armenia. Fourth is, of course, critical minerals and rare earth materials and Armenia's position there. And finally, a fifth, rather surprising breakthrough, a large military assistance package for Armenia with the purchase by Armenia of U.S.-developed reconnaissance UAVs or drones. So overall, we do see the vice president came to Armenia with a basket of deliverables, marking a significant pushback against Russia's position.
Yes, and it seems like, well, the United States is now a player in that part of the region, in that part of the world. Let's start off with this trip, the Trump route for international peace and prosperity. What is Yerevan's position on this, and how, in fact, will it really benefit Armenia?
Well, despite the rather immodestly named project, this is a $9 billion project in terms of restoring connectivity, trade, and transport. From an Armenian perspective, it's significant in 2 ways. First, strategically, it effectively restores deterrence, making the outbreak of hostilities from neighboring Azerbaijan much less. A second is this is the first step in a larger regional project of reopening closed borders. And in that context, Turkey is actually moving faster and further to reopen its closed border with Armenia. So the net positives are fairly clear from an Armenian perspective.
Yes. Now, that brings us to Russia. So, Russia has been losing influence in Armenia, as you've mentioned. How are they looking at this move that Washington is making? Is this a threat for Moscow? Does this mean that Russia is no longer an influential player in Armenia and Azerbaijan?
Well, actually, this is no surprise and not necessarily something new. Russia's influence, its position and power in the South Caucasus has been steadily draining, largely due to the fact that Russia's failed invasion of Ukraine has made them much more distracted, if not overwhelmed. However, as Russia in the future seeks to regain its lost power and influence, it's going to be from a position of weakness, not strength. And I do think the American planting of the flag in Armenia and tomorrow in Azerbaijan does mark a watershed turning point for Russia in the region.
Yes, we all remember the BTC pipeline back in the late 90s, early 2000s. That was something that was strategically important for the United States at the time. And it looks like we're at round two here. Talking about this trip corridor, they say that it's going to bring, or it's going to be a conduit for minerals, rare earths to come from Central Asia. You said that this may benefit Armenia. Is it going to benefit the broader international economy by reducing the stranglehold that China has simply on the production of such minerals? Do you think that this is something really concrete that we should be looking at right now, or is this something kind of further off towards the future?
Well, I think both. But overall, it's a very good question, Don, because what we see is this is still a region that is both remote and somewhat landlocked. In terms of Armenia being more of a gateway, both in terms of taking over from Georgia and Georgia's previous monopoly on trade and transit, it is an achievement. Second, in terms of Turkey going to Central Asia and Central Asia going westward, Armenia is now included in this new middle corridor design. So overall, economically and trade-wise, it is somewhat limited given the geography, but it's the geopolitics, and in terms of rare earth, it's the geology that's now attractive for actually challenging the Chinese position.
And I imagine this will cause further problems for Moscow and its influence over those former Soviet republics in Central Asia. Any developments on this front?
Well, I do think there are two interesting observations. First is many in Central Asia were very surprised at the degree of military weakness of Russia. The fear, the coercion and pressure from Russia in Central Asia is now perceived as much less. This also makes China much more attractive. A second observation here is China is probably the only winner from Russia's failed invasion of Ukraine and actually has a dominant power over Russia at this point. But I do think for this particular region, with Iran to the south and Turkey to the west, we are going to weather a period of instability for the coming years. Therefore, this economic interdependence is ever more crucial and critical.
Yes. I see how that ties in. Now, how about ties with Azerbaijan? There's still a lot of bitterness between the two countries over Nagorno-Karabakh, and how have these recent sentences in Baku for what Yerevan claims are prisoners of war? Will the United States Vice President, when he goes there tomorrow and the next day, will he address these issues on behalf of Armenia, in your opinion?
Well, I think he will. I also think he must. In other words, the one emotional outstanding issue between Armenia and Azerbaijan has been the show trials in Azerbaijan, and now resulting in the sentencing to the former leadership of the Armenian enclave Nagorno-Karabakh. What is, in terms of the best interest for everyone, is a pardon or amnesty to close the chapter for this sad emotional aspect. And since the August ceremony last year at the White House, this has been a quiet American expectation. And this is a case where perception matters as much as reality. And no one, including Azerbaijan, wants to disappoint the Americans.
Yes, and now one final question before we go. About 30 seconds, so I'll have to ask you to limit to it. What about Georgia? It's also notable that the U.S. Vice President is not going to Georgia and to the Georgian dream. What are your thoughts on that? Very quickly.
Well, it's a diplomatic, obviously, but it's well-deserved. The Georgian government is defying its own population and, unfortunately, has abandoned democracy.
All right, Richard Giragosian, founding director at Regional Studies Center. Thank you so much for joining us. Very much appreciate it, as always.
Thank you, Don.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thanks for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.